The hallway was dim, lit only by the orange spill of dusk pressing through the narrow front windows. The air between us thickened as we stood motionless, shoulder to shoulder beside the bookshelf. Neither of us spoke. I could feel his presence, calm, steady, quiet. He held the book in his hand like it meant more than it should. The same one I'd seen him reading last night. My voice caught when I finally said, "You were right. She does look like me." He looked down at the page, then up at me. We were close. Closer than I could allow. My back met the cool edge of the hallway wall as he stepped toward me, and for a breathless moment, there was no past, no future, no noise, no clocks. Then the garage door clattered open. I stepped back. The book dropped. The moment evaporated. My husband's voice echoed from the kitchen. Did someone forget to lock the back gate again? I bent quickly, picked up the book, and said nothing. Because I couldn't say anything. Not yet. Before I begin the story and tell you how everything really happened, answer this question: would you be able to forgive a loved one's betrayal? It started, as most things do, quietly. The house was already dressed for the season. Fake leaves in copper and rust lined the staircase banister. A pumpkin-scented candle flickered half-forgotten on the side table near the TV. Everything was tidy, set for Thanksgiving, except me. I stirred the coffee absent-mindedly, watching the local morning show drone on about turkey prices and cranberry shortages. My husband sat in his usual chair, legs crossed, reading the Sunday circulars like it was a job. His presence filled the room, and yet he hadn't actually looked at me once today. The knock at the door came earlier than expected. He looked up briefly, surprised. "That him already?" he asked, folding the paper. "I guess so." I opened the door. He stood there with a duffel slung over one shoulder, wind-mussed hair, and that same quiet confidence I remembered from years ago, only now he looked entirely grown. Not the lanky college kid who used to leave dishes in the sink and crash on the couch during winter break. "Hey," he said, eyes scanning mine with something unreadable. I smiled. "You're early." Traffic was light. And I figured, why not? His father appeared behind me, clapping him on the back and dragging the bag inside. The hallway filled with laughter. The two of them talked over each other while I stepped back, feeling the chill still clinging to my skin from the doorway. The house felt smaller with him in it. Later that afternoon, I found him alone in the den. The fireplace was off, but he sat cross-legged on the floor with a thick book open in his lap, the one from the top shelf. I hadn't seen anyone pull that down in years. "You found the art collection?" He looked up. "This portrait," he turned the book toward me, "she looks just like you." I laughed softly, too aware of the closeness. "It's probably just the hair." "No. It's the eyes. Same quiet." I said nothing. I didn't know how. Dinner that night was loud. Too much gravy. Not enough chairs. My husband talked about work, sports, cholesterol. The kind of noise I had learned to navigate like fog. Across the table, I caught him watching me when no one else was. Not staring. Just observing. Like he was trying to read something between lines. After dishes and pie, I went to bed early. Habit. Or avoidance. I passed by the den and saw him still there, curled into the armchair, that same book in hand. The room glowed orange from the low lamp beside him. He looked peaceful. Not bored. Not restless like most people his age. I pulled the blanket tighter around me. I couldn't sleep. The next morning I found a folded page in the art book, right where the portrait had been. At first I thought it was damaged, but then I noticed the handwriting. One sentence. "Not everything beautiful needs to be framed." I didn't know what to make of it, so I said nothing. That afternoon, my husband insisted on taking us all to the grocery store. Thanksgiving leftovers were apparently too depressing. In the car, they argued about football. I sat in the back, quiet, staring at passing trees until we pulled into the Trader Joe's lot. Inside, I drifted. I wandered from the cereal aisle to the floral section, trying to feel something. He found me standing by the orchids, thumbing the price tags. "Did you always like white flowers?" he asked. "I used to," I replied. "I don't know what I like anymore." We ended up decorating that evening. The bins came down from the attic, lights half working, ribbons curled in odd places. My husband gave up after an hour and went upstairs to check stocks. I stayed. He did too. At one point, I handed him an old ceramic reindeer, and our fingers brushed. Neither of us moved. Not at first. Then I pulled back, set the ornament down, and stepped away. He didn't say a word. That night, while my husband snored beside me, I stared at the ceiling and thought about that book. About the woman in the painting. About what it meant to be seen, not just watched. The next day we wrapped gifts at the kitchen table. Just the two of us. My husband had gone to meet an old coworker for lunch. We wrapped in silence until he broke it. "She was waiting for something," he said, tying a ribbon around a box. "Who?" "The woman in the portrait." I looked at him. Maybe she was just surviving. He didn't answer. We finished wrapping. The clock ticked. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I stood, ready to clean up, and noticed a soft thud outside, the sound of the wind knocking over something on the porch. I stepped out, sweater pulled tight. The wind caught my breath, but not because of the cold. He followed behind. We sat together on the porch swing with mugs of cider. The cushions were stiff from disuse. A few leaves scattered across the steps. Our legs accidentally touched. We didn't move. The quiet between us wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Almost too much. Then my husband's car pulled into the driveway. We both stood at once. "I'll finish cleaning up," he said. I nodded and walked inside. That night, I stared at the book again. I wanted to throw it out. I wanted to keep it forever. I did neither. The next morning, while reaching for the box of tea on the highest shelf, something else came loose and fell. It wasn't the book. It was the photo. One I didn't remember being taken. From behind. Of me, standing by the window, looking out. He must have taken it. Somehow. Quietly. The back of the photo had one word written in pencil. Stillness. And then it hit me. He wasn't trying to seduce me. He was trying to understand me. And for some reason, that terrified me more. I stared at the photo longer than I should have. My tea had gone cold, the morning sun now spilling across the kitchen tile like a spotlight on forgotten thoughts. I slid the photo back into the drawer underneath coupons and battery packs, where I knew no one would think to look. He was in the garage again that morning. I could hear the faint sound of music humming behind the door, classic rock, something soft but recognizable. I didn't say anything when I passed by. I just kept walking, arms full of laundry, pretending not to notice that his boots were gone from the mudroom. That day felt longer than usual. Around noon, he offered to run to CVS to pick up a few things we were low on. I told him I'd go with him. I needed a change of air, an excuse, anything. We got in my car and pulled out of the driveway without telling my husband, who was upstairs working on his laptop, immersed in market trends or something equally distant. The drive was quiet at first. We passed the corner where the farmer's market used to be, now replaced by a pop-up Christmas tree lot. People were already crowding around, picking out Douglas firs and flocked pines, debating over wreaths. The entire town smelled like cloves and damp leaves. He turned on the radio. It was an old folk song, something I hadn't heard since I was barely out of college. I looked at him, surprised. He didn't say anything, just tapped the steering wheel with his thumb. I let the song play. It rolled over me like waves I hadn't expected, dragging parts of me I'd thought long buried up to the surface. We didn't buy much at CVS. Just things we didn't need: breath mints, gift wrap, more tape. We lingered longer than necessary, walking the aisles like people with time to waste. On the way back, we stopped at a drive-thru and shared fries in the car without a word. When we got home, the house was still quiet. My husband had apparently left for the gym, judging by the empty spot in the driveway and the protein shaker rinsed in the sink. We started unpacking Christmas decorations, just the two of us. He took the ladder out and climbed up to hang lights around the entryway while I unpacked the boxes labeled Zmaz Living Room. Every piece had a memory. I couldn't decide if that made them feel more important or more hollow. At some point, I looked up and saw him adjusting the garland on the banister. He caught me watching. "You always arrange the decorations the same way," he said casually. "You remember everything." I don't know if that's a good thing. It is. The boxes were emptied by sunset. The living room had transformed into something warm, soft-lit, quietly festive. My husband texted that he'd be late, something about stopping by his brother's to look at a new snowblower. I didn't reply. We sat at the kitchen table, wrapping gifts that weren't surprises. Pajamas, books, some socks. We worked side by side, and the silence wasn't awkward. It was deliberate, careful. His hand brushed mine twice. Both times we pretended it didn't. But it lingered. We finished wrapping just as it started to snow outside. I stood to check the forecast on my phone, leaning against the window as flakes caught in the porch light. He came over quietly and stood beside me. Neither of us said anything. I didn't turn when I spoke. She was waiting for something. Who? The woman in the painting. He didn't answer. He just stood there, so close that I could hear his breath slow, measured. We stayed like that until the furnace kicked on and startled us both. I stepped away quickly, grabbing the empty tape roll off the table like it had been important. Later that night, we sat on the back porch with mugs of hot cider. The cushions on the chairs were cold, the fabric stiff from early frost. A string of lights blinked lazily above our heads. Our legs touched again. This time, neither of us moved. He looked over at me. I looked back. We kissed. The next morning, I was first to wake. The sun hadn't yet risen, but I couldn't stay in bed. I padded downstairs, stepping around the creaky floorboards like a practiced ghost. The living room was dim. The lights from last night were still glowing faintly, left on by accident. Or maybe not. I brewed a pot of coffee, but I couldn't drink it. My stomach churned. I opened the fridge twice, closed it without taking anything out. I paced. I waited for the sound of someone else waking up to break the weight in the air. He came downstairs after what felt like an hour. His hair was still damp from the shower, his sleeves rolled halfway. He walked into the kitchen like it was normal. Like the ground beneath us hadn't shifted. Neither of us said a word about what happened. I handed him a mug of coffee. He accepted it. Our fingers didn't touch this time. The tension broke when my husband walked in through the front door holding a bottle of antacids and a bag of breakfast sandwiches. He had gone out early without a word, said he couldn't sleep and wanted to beat the rush. I looked at the clock. It was barely 7:30. I got you your usual, he said, placing one of the paper bags in front of me. I thanked him. My voice sounded thin. He chewed, standing at the counter. Oh, he said casually, my stomach's been off since last night. Probably too much stuffing. This age, huh? I nodded. My hands trembled just enough to make the coffee spill when I set it down. He didn't notice. The rest of the day passed like a silent performance. Decorations were adjusted. Groceries were restocked. The snow melted into dirty puddles by mid-afternoon. We went through the motions of a family gathering without ever really connecting. That night, after they both went to bed, I stayed downstairs to straighten up the kitchen. I opened the drawer to grab scissors, and saw the folded page again. The one with the handwriting. I unfolded it, but this time, something was different. There was a second line. It hadn't been there before. Not everything beautiful needs to be framed. But some things are never meant to be kept. I froze. I searched the shelf where the book had been. It wasn't there. It was gone. And I hadn't taken it. I stood frozen in front of the bookshelf for what felt like minutes, maybe longer, though the clock on the microwave ticked away behind me like everything was normal. The book was gone. The message had changed. And I hadn't touched either. I checked the den first, even though I knew it wouldn't be there. The cushions were fluffed. The lamp was off. No book. Then I checked the coffee table. The end tables. The garage. Nothing. Not a single trace of that thick, beautiful hardcover that had become a quiet symbol for something I hadn't yet dared to name. Upstairs, the two of them were asleep. One snoring faintly, the other silent as stone. I backed out of the hallway, returned to the kitchen, and just stood there for a long time. The page was still in my hand. When morning came, I didn't mention it. There was no way to ask without revealing too much. Instead, we were pulled into the motions of the season. My husband had signed us up for a Christmas craft fair held at the local church gymnasium, some kind of fundraiser, and he insisted we all go. He was in a strangely cheerful mood that morning, humming along to old Sinatra songs as he buttered toast. I watched him from across the counter, trying to remember the last time I saw him look that relaxed. The fair was what I expected: booths of homemade candles, mismatched mittens, pinecone wreaths. Crowded aisles filled with retirees and oversugared kids. We moved together but separately. He was talking to a man selling yard inflatables. I was hovering near a booth with old glass ornaments when I felt a presence beside me. "Why do you always stop at the vintage ones?" he asked, his tone low and casual. "I like things with history," I said. "They look fragile." "They usually are." He picked up a green ornament shaped like a pine cone. "You know it's just molded glass, right?" "I know." I moved on before I could say anything else. Later, we stumbled across a dusty photo booth tucked in a corner of the gym. One of those cheap rentals, garland taped sloppily across the top, a wrinkled velvet curtain half open. For reasons I still don't understand, I stepped inside. He followed without asking. We didn't pose. We didn't smile. The flash went off 3 times. Each photo caught us in the middle of something unspoken, eyes looking off, hands half visible, distance and nearness in equal measure. The strip printed slowly. I took it and shoved it into my coat pocket. By the time we got back to the car, it was snowing again. We rode home mostly in silence. My husband talked about the best cider donuts he'd ever had from a vendor we missed. I nodded. In the back seat, I felt his leg shift just slightly against mine when we turned a corner. I didn't move. That night, I found the photo strip again while undressing. I looked at it under the bathroom light. It was blurry, imperfect, real. I tucked it deep into the bottom drawer of my jewelry box, underneath things I never wore anymore. The next day, he and I were sent to do a grocery run. My husband had stayed home to watch a game, which felt like a quiet gift I hadn't asked for. We moved through the aisles easily, effortlessly. Like this had always been normal. I noticed he grabbed my usual brand of hot cocoa without asking, the one no one else ever touched. I didn't mention it. Just added it to the cart. While bagging the groceries, he looked at me and said, "You've changed." "Maybe," I said. "Maybe I just stopped pretending I didn't want to." Back home, we unloaded in silence. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was careful. Like two people walking on a frozen lake, listening for cracks. The tree needed rearranging. Lights had shifted. Ornaments had fallen. I was kneeling by the base when he came over, holding the garland I'd meant to redo. I stood. He reached for the banister to start rewrapping, and the box of unused ribbon tilted and fell at my feet. We both reached at the same time. Our hands brushed. This time, we didn't pull away. He looked at me. Not in a way that asked permission. Not in a way that apologized. We kissed. I stepped back first. We didn't speak. He picked up the ribbon and handed it to me. I took it with steady hands. Dinner was quiet that night. My husband didn't notice. Or if he did, he didn't say anything. The snow kept falling outside, thin and constant. The house was warm. Too warm. I felt it in my collar, in my chest. After the dishes were done, I told them I was going to bed early. No one questioned it. But I didn't sleep. I sat in the bedroom armchair, watching the moonlight spill across the rug. The photo strip burned in my thoughts. So did the missing book. And the sentence he added that no one else could have known how to write. I don't know what I expected when I went downstairs again. Maybe that he'd be gone. Maybe that I would be brave enough to say something honest. But what I found was different. He was in the kitchen, standing by the window, holding the book. He looked at me when I entered, but didn't speak. I reached for it slowly, but he didn't let go. "I didn't take it," he said quietly. "You left it on the table." I didn't. We stood there, neither of us moving, the book between us like a lit match. "I thought if I kept it," he said, "maybe you'd come looking." I didn't answer. I didn't know how. Then, from upstairs, a loud thud. We both turned. A voice followed, my husband, calling out, "You guys seen my phone?" I pulled the book from his hands and placed it gently on the counter. By the time my husband came down the stairs, I was pouring water into the kettle, calm and efficient. "I left it in the garage again," he said, shaking his head, phone now in hand. Losing my mind. He didn't notice the book. Or us. But the next morning, while pulling a sweater from my closet, I found something tucked just inside the folded sleeve. It was a small square of photo paper. One of the pictures from the booth. The same one I'd hidden. Except this one had only me in it. And I wasn't holding it. He was. In the reflection of the glass behind me, his face was there, just enough to see that he'd never really left my side. Not even in the places I thought were mine alone. I held the photo for several minutes without moving. The edges were curled slightly, warm from where it had rested hidden in my sweater sleeve. I hadn't put it there. I hadn't printed a second copy. But there it was, the same image from the booth, only now I wasn't alone in the memory. His reflection behind me was unmistakable. Quiet, present, just outside the frame. I slipped it into the drawer under my scarves and closed it gently, as if making too much noise would confirm something I still wasn't ready to name. That afternoon, My husband called from the driveway as I was prepping lunch. He was tossing bags into the trunk, shouting about how he'd found a last-minute hotel deal in Killington. A proper winter weekend, he said. Just us. 2 nights. We'll leave before traffic hits. My heart stalled at the word us, and then immediately skipped again when I realized what it implied. He was leaving. And I wasn't going with him. He looked up at me from the driveway with that familiar grin, holding the keys in one hand and a duffel bag in the other. You don't even have to pack, he said. I need time on the slopes. You need time to yourself. Win-win. I nodded slowly, keeping my hands busy with the dishes. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't challenge it. Maybe part of me didn't want to understand his reasons too clearly. He left within the hour. The sound of the garage door closing behind him felt unreal. The silence afterward was louder than I could have imagined. For a long time, I just stood in the foyer, listening to the stillness. The only thing I could hear was the low hum of the refrigerator. I wasn't sure what to do with the quiet. I'd been craving it, hadn't I? The afternoon passed in fragments. I cleaned the kitchen twice. Rearranged the books on the shelf. Folded a pile of laundry that hadn't needed folding. Still, I didn't see him. Around sunset, I finally found him in the garage, alone, barefoot, seated on a tarp, his hands covered in charcoal dust. The air was cold, but he didn't seem to feel it. A single lamp cast long shadows across the concrete. He looked up briefly when I stepped in, but said nothing. His sketchpad was balanced on his knee, moving slightly with each breath. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, unsure if I'd interrupted something private. But he didn't hide it. He didn't turn the page. He simply held it there, visible. It wasn't finished, but I knew what it was. The outline was unmistakable. It was me. He didn't speak. I didn't ask. Later, we made dinner together. Something simple. Roasted vegetables. Toasted bread. A salad we barely touched. We moved in rhythm, a silent, practiced. Every motion quiet but deliberate. Our elbows never brushed. Our hands never collided. It was as if we had both memorized an invisible blueprint of caution. We ate in the den, the fire crackling low in the corner. I sat cross-legged in the armchair. He sat on the floor near the coffee table, legs stretched out. The lights from the Christmas tree blinked slowly. I remember the way they reflected off the glass of the framed wedding photo across the room, the one that hadn't been dusted in weeks. We didn't talk about anything meaningful. Just groceries. The weather. A snowfall that might or might not arrive by morning. By the time we cleared the plates, the power flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. A pause fell over everything. The house, the street, the world. Gone was the hum of appliances, the tick of the thermostat, the quiet buzz of lamps. He reached for his phone. I reached for the drawer where the emergency candles were kept. Within moments, the room was glowing gold and dim, shadows dancing on every wall. We didn't move toward each other right away. The air between us had already done that for us. He turned to face me, voice low but certain. This isn't a mistake. I stared at him. The flickering candlelight made it hard to tell what expression was on my face. But I didn't flinch. I didn't retreat. Then don't stop, I said. We spent night together. The next morning, the air was still heavy with whatever had settled between us. I woke early, startled by how deeply I had slept. The storm had passed during the night, leaving a thin frost along the windows. The power had returned. I heard the hum of the heater again. I got up carefully, not wanting to wake him. Downstairs, I made coffee the way I always did. Slow. Familiar. Repetitive. The weight of what had happened hadn't hit yet, but the shape of it hung in the corners of every room. I stood in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil, staring out at the quiet neighborhood where everything still looked the same. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud. Just 2 quick raps at the front door, followed by a long pause. I stiffened. Another knock. I crossed the foyer, pulse quickening. Through the glass, I saw her outline, my sister-in-law. Her coat was bright red. She held a small box and a white bakery bag. I opened the door slowly, trying to find my voice. Surprise, she beamed, stepping inside like she belonged there. They gave me extra muffins at the shop. Figured I'd drop some off before church. Where is he? I blinked. Who? Your husband, she said, brushing snow from her sleeves. Told me last night he'd be home all weekend. Said he was skipping the slopes 'cause of his back acting up again. I felt the room tilt slightly. Oh, I said, forcing a smile. He must have changed plans. Left early. Maybe didn't tell you. She raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Her eyes flicked toward the stairs. You look flushed. It's warm, I said quickly. Do you want coffee? She accepted. I poured with shaking hands. She didn't stay long. Just long enough to eat half a muffin and talk about her latest yoga class. I nodded in all the right places. I offered her a paper napkin. She left before asking to use the bathroom, thank God. When the door finally closed behind her, I stood there in silence, the lie still hanging in the air like smoke. Upstairs, the sheets were still warm. And then I realized. I hadn't told him my husband would be gone. Not once. He never asked. He simply stayed. I stood at the sink long after she left, staring at the 2 half-empty mugs and the smudged napkin beside the plate. The muffin crumbs looked like scattered punctuation across a paragraph I hadn't meant to write. My heart hadn't slowed since the moment she stepped through the door. The worst part was how natural it had all felt, how easily I had lied. Upstairs, the creak of floorboards told me he was awake. I didn't call out. I didn't move. I waited for him to come down on his own, unsure of how I'd look at him now. Not after what I had just done. Not after the lie I'd buried in my voice so easily. He appeared 10 minutes later, wearing the same flannel shirt from yesterday, his hair still damp. He moved through the kitchen like he belonged there. He poured himself coffee without asking. He leaned against the counter. Neither of us spoke. Eventually, he asked, "Everything okay?" She stopped by, I said flatly. He didn't need to ask who. The tension tightened between us like a drawstring pulled too fast. I didn't tell him she had asked about my husband. I didn't tell him what I'd said. We both let the silence fill in the blanks. After breakfast, I told him I needed to clear my head and went for a drive. I didn't say where. I didn't know myself. I just drove. Past the frozen lake. Past the strip mall where the stores had already changed their displays to Valentine's Day colors. Past the same road I used to take to work before I stopped pretending it mattered. The cold outside pressed against the windshield, gray and relentless. I parked by the library and sat in the lot without going in. I watched people walk by, carrying reusable bags, some holding hands, others alone. No one looked like they were lying to themselves. I don't know how long I sat there before the dashboard light warned me the battery was draining. I turned the ignition back on and drove home slowly, stopping at every light even when no cars were coming. I wanted the red to last longer. Back at the house, he was in the den with the fire on, sketchpad balanced on his lap. He didn't look up when I passed. I didn't stop to speak. We had become strangers again, except now the silence wasn't safe. I busied myself cleaning the guest bathroom even though it wasn't dirty. I scrubbed tiles that didn't need scrubbing. I reorganized the linen closet. I found a scarf I thought I'd lost last year and held it for too long before folding it again. By the time I came back downstairs, the fire had died. So had the light in the room. I stood in the kitchen, watching him through the doorway, his back turned to me, head low, shoulders still. He looked smaller somehow. Distant. He said quietly, "We're not invisible anymore." My voice caught. "I don't know what we are." He stood up and walked past me. No eye contact. No lingering pause. Just movement. That night, we didn't eat dinner together. He was in the garage. I was on the couch. I turned on the television for background noise and muted it 5 minutes later. My eyes drifted to the art book on the shelf. Still there. Still intact. But I couldn't bring myself to open it again. The next day, we went for a drive. Not together. I offered it like a compromise, said I needed fresh air, suggested he come with me. We didn't speak much in the car. The tension was stretched too thin. We drove out toward the coast. The water was gray and violent, crashing against the rocks like it was trying to climb back onto land. The wind howled. I wrapped my coat tighter. He stood near the edge of the bluff, arms folded. The distance between us was only a few feet, but it felt unbridgeable. I finally said it out loud. "This can't happen again." He nodded. Slowly. No protest. But he didn't look at me when he said, "I know." It didn't feel like agreement. It felt like resignation. We drove back in near silence. I didn't ask where he wanted to stop. He didn't ask me to keep going. The roads were slick. The tires hummed. He stared out the window, and I gripped the wheel tighter than necessary. When we got home, I went upstairs and buried myself in busywork again. Sorting clothes. Folding towels. Rearranging socks. Anything that felt like control. By the time I came downstairs for tea, the book was gone. I checked the shelf, then the end table. I looked beneath the couch, behind the cushions. I opened the drawer in the hallway cabinet where things sometimes got lost. Nothing. I opened the door to the garage. He wasn't there. I checked the laundry room. Nothing. He wasn't in the house. I walked through every room like I was chasing after something I'd forgotten to hold on to. Finally, I found him outside, sitting on the cold wooden bench beneath the pine tree in the backyard, hood up, his breath visible. The book was in his lap. He was staring at the closed cover. I opened the door and stepped out slowly. "You're freezing." He didn't answer. I sat beside him, not touching, just close enough to hear the cold settle into the wood beneath us. He looked at the book. She wasn't waiting. She'd already given up. I didn't know what to say. He handed it to me. "Take it." I looked down. The cover felt heavier than usual. Inside, a page had been torn out. It was the portrait. The one that started everything. I flipped through the pages slowly. Each one still intact. Except that one. Gone. I looked up at him. "I needed to forget," he said. But I didn't know how. He stood up and walked back toward the house, leaving the bench cold behind him. I stayed. When I came back inside, he was gone again. I didn't follow this time. I just held the book and sat in the chair by the fireplace. Later that night, I found it on my pillow. The torn-out page. Folded carefully. No note. No words. Just the portrait, creased, quiet, and incomplete. The portrait stayed on my pillow all night. I didn't move it. I couldn't. It felt like a farewell folded into paper, like something final he didn't want to say aloud. I stared at it until my eyes burned, then finally lay back, keeping it beside me like it was guarding the silence. By morning, the temperature had dropped. The sky outside the window was the pale color of January, even though the calendar still said December. The wind moved the bare trees in jerky spasms, and the whole neighborhood looked like it was holding its breath. He was already in the kitchen when I came down. Dressed. Packed. 2 mugs of coffee sat on the counter, his silent way of saying he didn't hate me, not entirely. He didn't sit. He didn't look me in the eye. I leaned against the wall, arms folded. "You're leaving." He nodded once. "I need to." "For how long?" He didn't answer. There was no fight, no scene. Just movement. Quiet footsteps upstairs. A zip of a bag. The opening and closing of drawers. I didn't follow. I cleaned the sink instead, then folded a dish towel that had already been folded. My husband returned just before noon. He walked through the door carrying a brown paper grocery bag, humming something tuneless. He kissed my cheek like he hadn't noticed I hadn't smiled all week. I watched him set down the bag and start unloading eggs, bread, cold cuts. Nothing had changed for him. Not the way he moved, not the way he glanced at the sports section still folded in his jacket pocket. He was back, and the house resumed its old shape as if it had never shifted. Except it had. Upstairs, the suitcase was already gone. We had dinner together that night, the 3 of us, for the last time. My husband told stories about a guy from work who bought a snowmobile off Facebook Marketplace and crashed it into a neighbor's fence. I half laughed when I was supposed to. The boy barely touched his food. I think we both understood that we had passed the point of pretending. Afterward, I stayed behind to wash dishes, listening to the muffled sounds of footsteps above me. Every creak, every thud sent my stomach twisting. The overhead light buzzed faintly. The faucet dripped once, then stopped. I turned the water hotter, then off. Still, I didn't move. He came downstairs with his bag, phone charger still swinging from the zipper. His jacket was already on. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but nothing came. He reached the door. Paused. Then turned to look at me. And smiled. Small. Almost apologetic. Then he left. The sound of the door closing was surgical, precise, clean, irreversible. I waited until the tail lights disappeared down the street before I allowed myself to sit. The chair was too hard, too cold. I moved to the couch. I couldn't get warm. I wrapped myself in a throw and sat there until the lights from the Christmas tree felt artificial. The next morning, I moved through the house like a guest. I cleaned a counter that didn't need cleaning. I straightened a crooked candle. I dusted the bookshelf, pausing at the now empty space where the art book used to sit. I let my hand hover there for a second before pulling it back. At some point, I opened the garage. I don't know why. Maybe to confirm that he had really left. His sketchpad was still there. I stared at it from the doorway for a long time. It sat on the workbench, untouched, exactly where he'd last left it. The pages curled slightly from the chill in the air. I reached for it, then stopped myself. I turned off the light and closed the door. I told myself I wouldn't look. I lasted until after dark. The house was too quiet. My husband had fallen asleep in front of the TV, remote tucked under his arm, mouth slightly open. I stepped over him, barefoot, silent, and slipped into the garage with only the hallway light behind me. The sketchbook felt heavier now. I sat on the edge of the workbench and opened it. Every page was her. Me. Versions of me. Angles I didn't know anyone had seen. One of me laughing, I didn't remember laughing that way. One of me staring out the window. One of me curled up in a chair with a book. He had caught me in motion, in stillness, in thought. It was unsettling how closely he had seen without touching. Toward the back of the book, there was one page that stopped me. A full portrait. Me, but not exactly. Me with the face of the woman in the art book. Same expression. Same slant of the shoulders. Same haunting sadness. But there was something new in this one, softness. A slight upturn at the corner of the mouth. A hint of relief. And in the corner, beneath the final line of charcoal, was a date. Today. He had finished it just before leaving. I closed the book and held it to my chest like something living. I stood in the dark, not knowing how long I'd been there, feeling like I had finally read a letter written without words. The next morning, my husband handed me a grocery list before heading out to run errands. He asked if I wanted to join. I declined. I needed air, but not that kind. I got in the car and drove to the old antique bookstore downtown. It was empty except for a woman dusting near the register. I wandered for a bit, letting my fingers trail over cracked leather spines, brittle pages, the scent of old stories. I didn't find anything I needed. But when I got back to the car and opened the glove box to check for napkins, I found something that didn't belong. Tucked beneath the owner's manual was a small envelope. Inside it, the missing page from the art book. The original portrait. The real one. The first one. I turned it over. One line written in pencil. Some things leave only to prove they were real. I stared at it, heart pounding. Because I hadn't put it there. And neither had he. And yet it had followed me. I sat in the driver's seat, still holding the envelope in my lap, watching the antique store's door through the windshield. No one had followed me in. No one had brushed past. I'd spoken to no one. But the envelope was real. The portrait was real. And the handwriting, that was his. For a moment, I thought about driving straight to wherever he was, to demand an explanation. To ask how he'd left it without leaving anything else. But I didn't even know where he'd gone. He hadn't said, and I hadn't asked. The sun was starting to drop behind the buildings when I finally turned the engine on. I tucked the envelope into the glove box and drove home like I was balancing on a tightrope, every movement deliberate. That evening, I sat through dinner with my husband without tasting a single bite. He talked about refinancing the house, something about the Fed and interest rates. I nodded where appropriate, sipped water when I needed a pause, kept my expression unreadable. Afterward, I went to the bedroom, opened my jewelry box, and pulled out the photo strip from the booth. I stared at it, then carefully tore it in half. Not out of anger, but out of preservation. Two halves felt safer than one whole thing that might expose too much. I tucked each half in a different drawer. The next few days blurred together. I busied myself with errands. Took over more community volunteering at the church. I said yes to a lunch invitation from a woman I hadn't spoken to in months. I returned 3 scarves I didn't need just for something to do. Each moment felt like an effort to build a dam against whatever was still rising underneath. At night, I stood by the window after my husband fell asleep, staring at the empty space on the street where a certain car no longer parked. I didn't admit to myself what I was waiting for. A week passed. On Sunday morning, I found myself dusting the same bookcase for the third time that week when something slipped behind the couch, the corner of a paper. I pulled it out slowly. A page torn from a notebook. No drawing this time. Just words. His handwriting again. I wonder if you ever felt seen before I did it. I folded the page and didn't let myself cry. I told myself it didn't matter how it got there. I told myself someone could have left it before. That maybe it had fallen days ago. I told myself anything but the truth. That night, while organizing the attic, another task I'd invented to avoid thinking, I opened a box marked holiday decor, miscellaneous, and found something strange. A canvas bag that didn't belong to us. I unzipped it and found a sweater folded inside. A charcoal pencil. And a tube of paint. I pulled the sweater out slowly. It was his. He hadn't taken everything. I stood there in the cold attic, sweater in one hand, fingers stiff, staring at it like it might breathe. Then, the knock. I heard it from above. Not loud. Not hurried. Just 2 knocks, then a pause. Then the front door opened. I froze. I lowered the sweater back into the bag and crept toward the attic stairs, every creak in the wood echoing like thunder. I stepped down into the hallway, heart racing, each sound below like it was wrapped in fog. Then I heard my husband's voice. Confused. Startled. Wait, what are you doing here? I froze completely. Then silence. Not a reply. Not a shuffle. Just a long, thick pause. I pressed my back to the wall outside the hallway, hidden from view. My breath shallow. Every second stretched like wire. Then my husband's voice again, this time lower, strained. Does she know you're here? Still no answer. A beat passed. Then the door clicked shut again. I waited 5 full minutes before moving. 5 minutes where I counted each breath. Each possibility. Each memory. When I finally stepped out, the living room was empty. The door was locked. My husband wasn't there. And sitting on the entry table was a single object. The art book. The same one I thought he'd taken. Only now, it had a new bookmark. A pressed white flower, tucked between 2 pages. I opened it slowly. The portrait was gone. But in its place, taped carefully to the inside cover, was something else. The photo strip. Whole again. I didn't move for a long time. The photo strip sat perfectly centered on the inside cover of the book, the tape at each corner clean, deliberate. Not just placed, but returned. Restored. I ran my fingers over the glossy surface, half expecting it to vanish under my touch. But it stayed, whole again, as if the past few weeks had never happened. As if he had never left. I closed the book slowly, carefully, and placed it back on the shelf, right where it used to live. The same space I'd dusted dozens of times without knowing what I was really looking for. Then I stepped back and stared at it for a moment, waiting for the weight to shift in my chest. It didn't. I went upstairs. My husband was already in bed, snoring faintly, one arm thrown over his chest like he was protecting himself from some invisible weight. I sat on the edge of the mattress and looked at him for a long time. Noticing things I hadn't noticed in months, the way his jaw clenched in sleep, the crease between his eyebrows, the half-folded corner of his pillow. The familiar things that used to mean something. Maybe still did. The next morning, the world resumed its rhythm. Coffee brewed. Car engines hummed outside. The neighbor's dog barked at the mail truck like it always did. I swept the porch, wiped down the patio table, and collected a few wind-blown pine needles from the cracks in the stone. By all accounts, it was a normal day. Until I went into the attic. It started with a simple search. I needed an extra set of lights for the porch railing. I thought they might be in one of the green plastic bins near the back. I hadn't been up there since I found the sweater, and for a moment, I considered asking my husband to go instead. But something in me said I should do it myself. The attic was colder than I remembered. Dust hung in the light like static. The floor creaked beneath my weight. I moved boxes aside one by one, breathing in the sharp, stale air that only attics have, part insulation, part forgotten time. When I finally found the right bin and opened it, a smaller cardboard box fell from behind it. It landed on its side, the flaps spilling slightly open. Inside were his things. Not just the sweater this time. Sketches. Dozens of them. Rolled. Folded. Some on canvas. Some on notebook paper. A few were rough outlines, ideas. Others were almost fully rendered. The same face again and again, but different angles, different moods. Moments I remembered and moments I didn't know had ever been captured. One of me laughing in profile. One of me kneeling beside the fireplace, stacking logs. One from the backyard, wind in my hair. One of me asleep on the couch. They weren't romantic. Not posed. They weren't meant to be seen, maybe not even meant to be finished. But they were real. Near the bottom was something wrapped in a soft cloth. I unwrapped it slowly, afraid of what I might find. A photograph. Printed on thick paper. Grainy. Black and white. It was me. From behind. Standing at the attic window. Looking out. And in the reflection, barely visible in the glass, was his face. The same way it had appeared in the photo booth strip. Just enough to know he'd been there. That he'd always been there. I put everything back in the box, heart racing, hands shaking. I closed the lid. And then I saw it. Taped to the bottom of the box, a note. One line. If this is all we ever were, it was still enough. I didn't cry. I couldn't. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't grief. It was something else. Something I hadn't named yet. I carried the box downstairs slowly, unsure what I was going to do with it. But before I could decide, I heard my husband call out from the foyer. His voice wasn't casual. It wasn't angry either. It was surprised. Startled. "Wait, what are you doing here?" I stopped. My breath caught. I couldn't move. The box in my arms felt suddenly too light. From the top of the stairs, I couldn't see the door. Only his back. He stood frozen, keys still in one hand, the other resting on the edge of the wall. No reply came. I stepped forward, quietly, slowly, just far enough to see the entryway. And then I saw who was standing in the doorway. Him. His coat dusted with snow. A backpack slung over one shoulder. Expression unreadable. His eyes met mine, not with desperation, not with guilt. Just something still. Still and steady and patient. I didn't speak. My husband turned toward me, eyes narrowing, waiting for something. But I didn't speak. Not yet. I just stood there, at the top of the stairs, holding a box full of proof, and stared down into the moment I hadn't prepared for. And then... the screen door creaked open again. Another figure stepped inside. Behind him. She looked between all three of us. His mother. She smiled. A soft, restrained smile. And said, "I told him you wouldn't forget." Then she closed the door behind her.